Welcome to the debate. Today we are jumping right into the core of professional restoration contracting. We're focusing on some key insights from Chapter 7 of Latif's Comprehensive Guide. And this chapter is all about mastering the supplement negotiation and follow-up process. This is the phase, really, that dictates whether a contractor captures maximum legitimate profit or, leaves thousands of dollars on the table.
Absolutely. And the financial impact of getting this right is, well, it's transformative. Latif's principles are designed to educate contractors on how to seriously increase their legitimate profits. We're talking about moving from, say, $125,000 in annual supplement recovery to over $1 million, depending on their scale. But the path to getting there, the difference between a $2,500 claim and a $4,000 claim, that depends entirely on the negotiation methodology.
And that's precisely the tension we need to explore. So the central question that comes out of this is, in supplement negotiation, should a contractor's primary focus be on A, establishing a collaborative teamwork mentality that's aimed at making the desk adjuster's approval process, while effortless, or should they prioritize B, a strategic persistence that's anchored strictly in objective code requirements and evidence to minimize any compromise?
Right? And I'll be arguing for the latter. Rigorous, non-negotiable documentation and the persistence required to back it up, that has to be the foundation. We have to approach this negotiation with the confidence to ask for and to stand firm on what is rightfully owed.
And I'm going to argue that while that documentation is, of course, a fundamental prerequisite, it's the collaboration and the focus on ease and speed of approval that are paramount for rapid, repeatable success. Friction, it just kills cash flow and ultimately stunts your growth.
I see why you'd think that, focusing on the speed, but let me offer a different perspective on what professional engagement really means. My position is that rapport, it's secondary to evidence. The true game changer is having the confidence to ask for what you're legitimately owed, backed by non-negotiable authorities.
Non-negotiable authorities like what, though? I mean, we need to be specific about what levers we're actually talking about here.
We're talking about standing firm on items required by law, by code, or by warranty. So, for example, citing IRC 905.2.85 for drip edge installation, that's a structural necessity that is, often overlooked or just flat out denied. Or you could consider manufacturer specs that require hand sealing on steep slopes, which carries huge warranty implications. Even federally mandated costs like project manager supervision, the line item lab super, that's required under OSHA 1926.502H. Professionalism means showing up as an expert who knows their worth and documents their work. It's not about being the most agreeable person on the phone. Compromise should be limited to minor discretionary items, never legal requirements. That's how you ensure you're fairly compensated for doing legitimate code-compliant work.
That's a very important foundation. And I agree, those specific citations are the ammunition you need. But I would frame the application of that authority differently. While that documentation is the prerequisite, success in supplementing really hinges on professional rapport and, crucially, on reducing the friction for the desk adjuster. They're our direct target here. The adjuster is not the adversary. Their job is just to verify documentation to justify a payment to their supervisors. It's all based on clear guidelines.
That sounds ideal, but in practice, relying on rapport over hard evidence often leads to unnecessary concessions.
Not if you adopt the teamwork mentality. By doing that, we reposition the contractor and the adjuster as working together to properly document the claim so it meets the carrier's own internal compliance. Our strategy has to be to make approval the path of least resistance. This means providing everything they need in their native language, highly structured Xactimate estimating, clear file names, and bulleted justifications that cite the very codes you just mentioned, right there in the estimate.
Okay, but how exactly do you ensure that ease of approval beyond just, listing codes?
You utilize the justification mechanisms that are built into the software they use. We structure the supplement using clear, concise language in the F9 notes, those standardized justification boxes right inside Xactimate. This note field is the first place the adjuster goes to pull the rationale they need for approval.
So if those notes clearly map a cost to a specific, non-negotiable code and reference the corresponding photo, the adjuster can just copy and paste that justification directly into their file to satisfy their boss. When you execute with that level of clarity, supplements often get approved, and quickly, sometimes within 72 to 96 hours, because you've essentially done their work for them. That speed is a direct function of collaboration, not confrontation.
Then Xactimate using clear F9 notes is essential. It's professional accountability. It certainly streamlines things. They are facilitators of payment, but only if we give them the right ammunition.
Exactly. The goal is to move the claim off their desk swiftly and cleanly.
However, I come at this from a different angle regarding persistence and the reality of an adjuster's workload. While efficiency is crucial, strategic persistence is absolutely critical because adjusters they're overwhelmed. Even a perfectly documented file can sit in a massive queue for days or even weeks. If you haven't received an acknowledgement within, say, 24 business hours, strategic follow-up isn't an option. It is necessary to maintain momentum.
But doesn't that just imply we should prioritize the quality of the initial submission to reduce the need for all that follow-up?
Not necessarily. Allowing the claim to sit in limbo costs the contractor and the homeowner time, which undermines the whole goal of maximizing the claim. The idea that they're not out to deny your supplements is true, but they will deny poorly documented ones. Or more commonly, they'll let claims that aren't followed up on just age out of their workflow. That's why rigorous follow-up, sometimes 6 or more times if you have to, is just essential professional persistence. It's a necessary cost of doing business with an overwhelmed claims department.
Okay, I fully agree that following up is crucial, but the need for 6 follow-ups, that often indicates that the initial documentation didn't achieve that level of internal ease we're aiming for. A perfectly packaged supplement, using those clear F9 notes and linking directly to organized, labeled photos, it forces a faster approval. And why? Because the time it takes the adjuster to approve it is less than the time it would take to field 6 different phone calls from you asking about the status. My philosophy minimizes the need for those painful follow-ups by maximizing the initial clarity.
But what happens when that initial clarity is met with resistance? Not because the documentation is bad, but because the carrier's internal guidance pushes back on high-value line items where they know contractors often compromise. This brings us right back to objective authority. Leading with collaboration can sometimes signal a willingness to just yield.
All right, let's take a specific example of resistance then, one you cited earlier.
Okay, let's take LAB Super Project Manager Supervision. This is the cost for a competent person on the job site, which is mandated by OSHA 1926.502H. Carriers deny it all the time, arguing that the cost is already bundled into O&P or general contractor overhead. If an adjuster denies LAB Super, the proper response isn't compromise. It's not saying, well, how about half? It is citing the federal mandate and clarifying that the expense is a required safety measure, distinguishing the cost of the competent person from the working foreman. Compromising on code-required or federally mandated items is it's never justified, even if it speeds up payment, because that is pure profit erosion.
I understand the desire to protect every dollar, especially on a mandated cost. I do. However, I'm not convinced that leading with OSHA says you must pay this is the most effective tactical move, because it just risks creating unnecessary conflict, which slows the claim down more than a tactical reframe.
So how do you approach a federally mandated cost without invoking the federal mandate?
You use the how can we question, which is detailed in Latif's guide. It's a very specific and I think powerful collaborative technique. You ask, how can we best document this specific safety expense to show it meets your internal requirements for a code-required cost rather than being flagged as an optional markup?
That sounds like soft language, when what you need is hard evidence and a firm stance.
Packs the adjuster's workflow. It turns the adjuster from an adversary who's denying the cost into a partner in finding the specific documentation or phrasing they need for approval. This works because the adjuster often just needs the correct phrasing to justify the payment to their own manager. And crucially, the how can we phrase internally recontextualizes the issue. It shifts the adjuster's file note from denied contractor disagreed to pending awaiting further documentation. That's a massive internal difference for them. It keeps the file moving without triggering a formal fight.
But if we compromise the language too much to achieve that collaboration, we dilute the authority of the request. We have to maintain the posture of presenting what is owed, not asking for permission. When you concede on the language of authority, you make it easier for the carrier to negotiate down other items later. We have to remember that Xactimate pricing is just a baseline. Supplementing is necessary to cover overhead and compliance costs that aren't included. If we compromise on a federally mandated safety cost like Lab Super, we're basically forcing ourselves to absorb that expense, and that is just not sustainable.
That's a compelling argument about the long-term posture. I'll grant you that. But let's move to the boundaries of strategic compromise, because timing and cash flow are just so vital. I maintain that compromise is strategic and often necessary to accelerate payment. Okay, in what scenario is compromising on a verifiable objective cost strategic?
All right, so let's say we have a complex supplement. It totals $7,500 with 10 line items. The adjuster approves 9 of them, but completely denies 1 item. Let's say it's 5 sheets of waste factor, arguing 4 sheets is enough. We have a choice. We can fight over those 5 sheets, which might total less than $300, or we can accept the $7,200 payment now. A contractor should be willing to accept that partial approval if it moves the entire payment forward, provided they can submit a second supplement later if more is discovered.
And why is that strategic?
That just sounds like giving away $300 that you legitimately earned and documented.
It's strategic because of the time value of money. That $7,200 today lets the contractor immediately fund the job, pay crews, and move capital to the next project. Delaying the entire $7,500 for 3 weeks while you argue over $300 costs the business significantly more in lost opportunity and financing costs than the $300 you recover. Speeding up cash flow preserves the relationship and accelerates the whole pace of the business.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that if the documentation is perfect. And let me tell you why. Contractors have to be intensely wary of compromises that erode profit margins on legitimate work. If a request is legitimate and it's backed by clear objective documentation, photos, manufacturer specs, whatever, accepting a partial approval is leaving documented money on the table.
But if the adjuster only approves a slightly lesser quantity, and the amount is truly minor, why stall the entire supplement and risk the relationship? Because yielding on those legitimate objective costs sends a signal to the carrier that your documentation is negotiable, even when it's anchored in proof. That sets a negative precedent for your next claim. And more dangerously, it compromises your own profitability calculation. If you consistently absorb legitimate costs through compromise, you are forcing the business to operate on thinner margins or cut corners, which is exactly why Latif stresses that just doing good work isn't enough. You need the compensation structure to support that good work. Our persistence protects our standards.
I do acknowledge that accepting a partial payment on items like that is a calculated risk. But we also have to consider the ethical dimension of operational delays. I mean, if fighting for those final 2 sheets of decking forces a 3-week delay on the entire claim payment, that delay costs the business, and crucially, it delays the homeowner's repair. Strategic compromise, even on defensible items, can be the most profitable and professional move if it accelerates the large infusion of cash that lets you service your client.
Right, and I agree that delays hurt the homeowner, but the solution is strategic follow-up, not financial concession. We should persist and say, I can provide additional photos to show that all 8 sheets meet the unavailable surface requirement that violates IRC minimums, justifying the full request. You anchor the persistence in the legal or empirical necessity, not just a desire to get paid quickly. And that distinction between speed and authority is what separates an average operation from a premier high-profit one.
Ultimately, what we're debating here is the prioritization of strategy. Speed and low-friction collaboration versus maximum recovery per line item anchored in unwavering authority. And, both paths acknowledge the absolute necessity of rigorous documentation.
Precisely. We both recognize that the foundational principles in Latif's guide, thorough documentation, Xactimate proficiency, professional conduct, are essential for success and for achieving those substantial revenue increases. But it's the methodology you apply in the negotiation phase that determines the ceiling of that success.
My core belief remains that the most scalable and profitable success is found when expertise is coupled with communication that's designed to make the adjuster's job easiest, the collaborative path. That minimizes resistance and maximizes the speed of approval. We should always seek that collaborative path first because efficient cash flow it mitigates risk and accelerates growth.
And I conclude that sustainable maximum recovery is rooted in the strategic confidence to persist and stand firm on non-negotiable costs backed by legal and empirical documentation. Only when you demonstrate that your documentation is non-negotiable do you establish the authority that's required to secure the full claim recovery you deserve, claim after claim.
We encourage our listeners to review the material in Latif's guide, apply these principles to their next claim, and determine which negotiation style, collaborative ease, or strategic persistence best suits their operation to maximize their legitimate profits.
And this material is part of a continuing series focused on educating contractors on better supplement practices. Be sure to tune in for the next chapter of this deep dive. There are many more opportunities to explore how professional contractors can truly master claim profitability.